Senator Wyden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's been an excellent hearing, and I want to talk for a minute about one way, in my view, that our country can address this income inequality issue and do it in a way that Democrats and Republicans will support, that we can actually see some real coming together around. And I want to start with you, Dr. Bernstein. I know you're one of the advisors to somebody who is part of my little cross-section of economists, Mark Thoma at the University of Oregon. And let me start with you, if I could. One of the fastest growing parts of the federal government are the tax expenditures. We're upwards of $1 trillion today. And what is clear, you see it with progressive folks, you see it on the conservative pages of the Wall Street Journal, that disproportionately tax expenditures go to the folks who are best off in America. So it seems to me that if you clean out these tax expenditures that Democrats and Republicans now correctly have concluded disproportionately benefit the folks that are best off, and use those very same dollars to broaden the base of the tax system, we would be in a position in our country to help grow the economy, create good-paying jobs. That's what happened after progressive Democrats and Ronald Reagan came together in the middle 80s. We'd be in a position to grow the economy and make a real dent in terms of income inequality. I mean, you could almost legislate what amounts to a pay hike for middle-class folks because you would be broadening the base and putting them in a better position to keep up with costs, and they haven't had a pay raise for a decade. Dr. Bernstein, any quarrels with that kind of analysis?
I very much agree with the broad architecture of your thinking there, and I do view this as somewhat of a holy grail for tax reform, and I think that's fairly widely agreed upon by folks on both sides of the aisle. Now, you know, the devil's in the details, and when you start going after people's tax expenditures, they get a little sensitive. But one that I mentioned in my discussion today, and I even cited a tax expenditure cost from the Joint Committee on Taxation, was the benefits we provide in that part of the code to capital gains and dividends, which amount to $450 billion in terms of its cost to the Treasury over 5 years. But I would say this, two things. One, the distribution of expenditures is skewed, as you suggested. Not that many go to the middle class. The main one is the mortgage interest deduction, and that's not trivial, but that, again, is largely benefits those in the top few in the upper percentiles. I'd also say that where there's also some important tax expenditures that I had argued in my testimony that this committee on the budget should protect are refundable credits that help to support the income, and I'd argue the opportunities of our lowest income families. Two particularly important ones because they were introduced in the Recovery Act and have been I think smartly renewed at the end of 2010 was the refundable credit on the earned income tax credit and the child tax credit. Those are tax expenditures that I think actually are very consistent with improving the opportunity and dampening, moderating the inequality that we've talked about so far.
I want to let your colleagues get into it. I just wanted to, again, highlight the prospects, and your response to my question, I think, reaffirms this, the opportunity for bipartisanship in this area. For example, Senator Coates and I have introduced the first bipartisan approach really in 25 years since the Reagan proposal. Senator Coates, to his credit, keeps the refundable credits that you're talking about, so we retain those. And then with respect to capital gains and essentially investment income, we put that on a progressive scale as well, so as to really, again, try to bring this base broadening approach to essentially the entire economy. I mean, there's no reason why it can't be applied to investment income as well. Essentially, under our approach, we put a certain amount off limits, and then everything above that we put on a progressive scale. So yes, somebody who makes all their income just on investment will pay a bit more, but we've talked to people who work in that area, and they say they can live with that. And we broaden the base so as to bring a whole lot of additional people.
Can I make one more quick point about this, sir? It's very important not to view, I fully support everything you just said, but I think it's very important not to view this as solely revenue neutral, as if you'd want to essentially return all of the tax expenditures that you get back from broadening the base in lower rates. Some of it needs to be reserved to reduce the deficit and to offset some of the deep spending cuts, particularly the ones that threaten opportunity and mobility.
It's not fair that if I respond to everything that you've said, I want to get everybody into it. Our bill was actually scored by the Joint Committee on Taxation. They essentially give informal analyses as generating, revenue. And then, of course, again, on both sides of the political spectrum, Brookings folks who've been on the progressive side, Heritage folks on the other side, also highlight the fact that this kind of pro-growth approach to tax reform, whether it will produce exactly what we had in the 80s, the principles are still the same. And given the fact that we have this growing income inequality in the United States, and all sides, all across the political spectrum, people say tax expenditures have played a role in it. This is a chance to bring, I think, Democrats and Republicans together, and we're going to prosecute the case. Would any of you other four who've been very patient like to add anything on the question of tax expenditures and income inequality? Not required to.
If nobody else is going, I wanted to add one thing on the issue of taxes and the potential for some sort of alliance. There's a new poll that just came out from the small business majority that asked small business owners about whether or not millionaires are paying their fair share in taxes, and it has some really interesting new findings. So I would encourage you to look at it because it's connected to that logic. That a majority of small business owners favor letting the Bush tax cuts lapse for those making more than $250,000 a year. So, I think there is some opening there to at least talk about the folks at the high end.
Any others? Yeah.
Thank you for the opportunity, Senator Wyden. I would not disagree with some of the principles that you've articulated. I think it's not completely clear to me that it would have a big impact on the sort of striking charts that we were just looking at. I think, and maybe Dr. Bernstein will correct me if I'm wrong, the difference between his chart and the chart in the back is that his is after tax, and I think the one that's been presented up front was before tax. So I'm not sure that it will have the direct visual impact on these charts. What I do think is unfortunate about the tax expenditures is because the benefits do tend to flow to folks who have already accumulated assets, it tends to subsidize asset purchases that would have been made anyway, which is inefficient, but which also has the effect of bidding up the price of these assets, and so it puts things like home ownership.
Take a look, and Chairman Conrad's been good enough to let me just wrap up with this point. Take a look at some of the increases in income that middle-class people would have under what Senator Coates and I are proposing. I mean, I'm not here speaking for him. He's a conservative Republican, but for example, we tripled the standard deduction. So that means for a middle-class family that is making $10,000 a year in income, that means $30,000, they make $50,000, $60,000 is put off limits. So we're talking about putting thousands of dollars into the pockets of middle-class folks by broadening the base, doing it in a bipartisan way, by getting at this tax expenditure issue, which is so tilted according to all philosophies, and giving people that relief permanently. So take a look at those numbers and be interested in your thoughts. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the extra time.
Yes.